We can either see this as an opportunity for growth, or we can see this like the universe is trying to take us down.
You're listening to the Happy Doc Student Podcast, a podcast dedicated to providing clarity to the often mysterious doctoral process. Do you feel like you're losing your mind? Let me and my guests show you how to put more joy in your journey and graduate with your sanity, health, and relationships intact. I'm your host, Dr. Heather Frederick, and this is episode 16. Have you ever felt like the world is trying to take you down through your doctoral process? Well, listen in as today's guest shares not only what's going on, but what you can do about it. Dr. Anna Yusim is a Stanford and Yale-educated, board-certified psychiatrist who both has a robust private practice in New York City and Connecticut and serves on the clinical faculty at Yale Medical School. She has published over 70 academic articles, book chapters, scientific abstracts, and book reviews on various topics in psychiatry. She has received such an incredible number of awards from prestigious institutions that seriously, if I were to list them all, we would need 2 podcasts. And I'm not exaggerating here. She is internationally recognized as a trailblazer among healers, a gifted speaker, and the best-selling author of Fulfilled: How the Science of Spirituality Can Help You Live a Happier, More Meaningful Life. She is presently starting a spirituality and mental health center at Yale and making a feature-length documentary on the interface of mental health and spirituality. She's been a guest on countless national and international TV shows, radio programs, and podcasts. And wow, I am so grateful that she is here on mine. Just a real quick shout out to Maureen St. Germain, because if you haven't listened to episode number 4 on manifesting your heart's desire, you really ought to, because the fact that I am here interviewing Dr. Yusim speaks to the efficacy of Maureen St. Germain's techniques. Now, all right, let's dive into what I'm sure will be a thought-provoking, paradigm-shifting conversation. Welcome to the show, Anna.
Thank you so much, Heather. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Let's start with a question that I'm sure is on many of my listeners' minds, and that is, how the heck does someone with your background not just get interested in spirituality, but actually do this pivot where it becomes a large part of your life's work?
So Heather, if anyone had told me 20 years ago that I would become a spiritual person and be studying spirituality, I would have laughed. Although my mother has always been very spiritual, my father is much more rational. He's a physicist by his trade. I grew up a lot more like my dad, wanting reason and logic to explain how the world worked. And that took me all the way to Stanford, to Yale Medical School, and to my residency at NYU in psychiatry. And then, as many people, I encountered a stumbling block in what I call my dark night of the soul. It was pain that brought me to spirituality. A number of things were happening in my life that things just were not working. I was looking for my soulmate, and the man that I thought was my soulmate, it turned out he was dating many other people. So that was a total heartbreak. And then at the same time, I was doing my residency, and it was just so overwhelmingly difficult on so many levels, just physically and with all the administration, and a number of things happened that just really made me feel like a failure. And am I even going to be able to do this? All of those things together made me start looking for ways to heal myself. After all, I'm supposed to be training to heal all these other people. So how do I heal myself? And I looked towards the tools of my profession, which are therapy, psychotherapy, perhaps medication. I was, considering, what am I going to do? And as I was considering this, I thought, I feel as though my healing is actually elsewhere. I feel like my healing is at the soul level. I want to really start understanding other modalities of healing and other philosophies on what it means to heal. And that's where the journey really began. I started understanding how to heal oneself and, elevate your consciousness, because I felt from this place of fear, sadness, a failure, weakness. I'm like, no, there must be more here. And this is all within me. How do I transform this? So I started studying in a totally new way. I went and spent time in ashrams in India, learning to meditate. I went to Thailand to learn different types of meditation. I went to Israel and then to New York City and learned Kabbalah practices and the philosophy of that. I started working with different shamans in South Africa, South America. And all these people taught me these ideas about healing and how to heal in a way that just was not a part of my profession. So that helped to heal me in a very profound way. And I thought, you know what? I love my profession. I love the tools of psychiatry, but I want to integrate the two. And so here I am many years later doing exactly that.
You brought up this concept of the soul. Why don't we spend just a minute here, maybe more, talking about what do we mean when we talk about the soul?
Right. And that's an important question because in all my time in medical school residency, it's really not something that's mentioned. We're not healing the soul. We're healing the body. We're healing the mind. We're healing emotions. We're healing thoughts. But that soul concept is so elusive. And what is it really? So this was actually one of the key questions that I started asking as I was doing my world travels, trying to understand other perceptions and perspectives on healing. And my favorite definition of soul came from a shaman with whom I worked in Mexico, Fernando Broca. He said that the soul is comprised of two parts. There is the part that connects us to everybody and everything. Often people say we're one unified soul. And so this is that part. This is what they're referring to. And the other part of your soul is that which encompasses your uniqueness. So the way in which you can share your unique gifts and talents, abilities, experiences, likes, dislikes, etc., with the world. So our soul, therefore, is a bipartite system of uniqueness and interconnectedness. And so how do you then apply that, right? We apply that by trying to figure out ways in which we can do those two things, connect with everything that is, like to really honor our interconnectedness with each other, with the world, with the planet, through many different things, and then also figure out how to start to connect to your soul and hear its still quiet voice, which is often thought of as intuition, the voice of your soul.
So now that you've got all this information and you did your travels and studies and you've been applying this in the lives of many of your clients, if you could go back and visit Anna in her medical school, in her residency programs, knowing what you know now, what kind of information and wisdom would you bring to her?
First, I would tell her not to be so much of a people pleaser because my whole life has been about being a people pleaser, being the good girl, doing everything right, being a good student, a good this, a good that. And you know what? That gets old and that wears on your soul. And actually, what you want to do is you want to live authentically. It doesn't mean you're going to go rebel and then, like everything's, throw out the way that you've lived your life. Not at all. But to really tap into your soul and how am I feeling about this? What kind of boundaries do I need to set in my life? I don't need to be liked by everybody. I don't need to like everybody. I don't need to be living in that way. So how do I set boundaries with the right people and have experiences that really nourish me and nurture me and try to remove to the degree that's possible those experiences that could undermine me? Now, truth be told, you're in a program like I was in residency. You don't have full control over your schedule, over your life, over what you do. So you don't have 100% control of that. And so the other part that I would tell myself, which is what I tried to do back then, but I would just reinforce it, is really to be humbled by whatever challenges come into your life, to let that humble you and to grow through the humility. And to know that there's this concept of a soul correction, or those things that our soul has come into this world to correct. And whatever things are difficult for you, usually it's a part of your soul correction. You could know your soul correction by asking yourself the question, what are those things that keep coming up in your life again and again and again, often much to your chagrin and dismay, and despite your best efforts to change it? Or another way to say that is, what is your greatest source of pain? That is often your soul correction. And soul correction comes from this. It's a Hebrew word, tikkun, which means to correct. And we all come into this world with our soul correction, those things that over the course of our lifetime will be our challenges that we're meant to correct and rise above, and our soul purpose, which is those things that we're meant to contribute given our unique gifts and abilities.
This is a huge concept, Anna, because as you're talking, so many thoughts are popping into my mind. For all the listeners out there, if you just take a moment and you ask yourself, what's my greatest source of pain? What are the things that keep showing up for me that I'm not that happy about? These are symptoms, signals, signs of this soul correction. And it might start to feel like, wow, being in higher education, being in a graduate program is almost offering up your soul corrections on a silver platter. We talk about it. It's not just this academic program, but it's this transformative journey. And there's a concept here that's implicit in what you're saying. And it's this concept that when people hear it, they usually have one of two reactions. They get really excited and feel empowered, or they think the world is playing a cruel joke on them. And that is that our reality is a reflection of our beliefs, right? So what you have said is that you don't draw into your world what you want. You draw into your world what you are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's such a powerful concept. That's a very, very key spiritual principle. And so it's so important to sometimes look and say, what are we drawing in? And is that what I want? If so, great, keep going. If not, let's do an about face and let's really examine if I'm drawing in the wrong kind of people, whether it be friends, advisors, girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever it is, why? How can that be a reflection of me? And let me give you a personal example of this. As I was looking for my soulmate, way back in the day, I kept drawing in over and over and over emotionally unavailable men. It was one after the other. And I'm like, why is this happening? Is the world playing a cruel joke on me, like you said? Or am I doing something that's a little bit just off? Like, what vibe am I giving out that's bringing this in? And so the spiritual principle is we don't draw into our life that which we want. We draw in that which we are. I was drawing in these emotionally unavailable men because a part of me was emotionally unavailable. And so I had to do a lot of work on myself to figure out, okay, well, yeah, I'm saying I want a soulmate relationship. I want to get married. And yet that's not what's coming up. That means I have to work through some things beforehand. What part of me is afraid of intimacy? What part of me isn't sure that I want to give up my freedom? What part of me has hesitation and fear about that kind of relationship? And in working that through years later, I did draw in a very emotionally available, wonderful man who is my husband and soulmate now of, I think, 7 years.
And if we take that example and translate it to some of the things that I've seen as people are working through a doctoral program, really this concept that you brought up of humility really comes to the forefront, because when you're in these rigorous programs, you're being asked to change the way you think, up level the way you write. You're constantly being criticized in a way that the educational system usually doesn't serve it up quite the way they serve it up when you're in a doctoral program or in medical school, I'm sure, right? And so to ask yourself, what might these experiences of the way I'm reacting to this feedback and the resistance that I'm having towards growing myself personally, whether you're looking for your soulmate or you're struggling with procrastination and completing this project, what are some of the things you would recommend people do to get in touch with their soul and to better understand how to make these corrections?
Absolutely. It's like, first, to understand what is your soul correction, you can ask yourself the question, what is the greatest source of pain in my life? What keeps coming up? Kind of like Sigmund Freud's, what he calls a repetition compulsion, over and over and over again. So then you understand what is the challenge. Now, how do you overcome the challenge? Then you have to look at, what is my usual response to that challenge? Okay, I respond a certain way. But how you overcome it is you actually go against your nature. If I were not to respond in my typical way to this soul correction issue, what would I do and what would that look like? How do I go against my nature and actually do the opposite? And the universe is going to test you a few times. So it's not just going to happen once. It's going to happen usually, in Kabbalah, mysticism, they say you get the same test 3 times. Once you pass it 3 times, you're done. You get to the next level. So, and I want to also bring up another really important point about what you said, Heather, because we can either see this as an opportunity for growth, or we can see this like the universe is trying to take us down. The latter way of thinking is victim mentality. And who has not been guilty of victim mentality? We take on victim mentality when we think that we are at the hand of an unjust world, unlucky circumstances, a punitive God, a difficult childhood. And this is not to say that people don't have difficult childhoods or very real abuse and neglect from which they suffer and from which very real things need to be done to change things. And this is so many things in our country. There is a lot of people who have unfortunately been very, very victimized by certain kinds of injustices and practices that, thank goodness, people are trying to change right now. But it's very different from being a victim and taking action to change it and living with a victim mentality. Victim mentality is when we feel powerless, when we feel as though the source of the problem is completely outside of ourselves and we have no control. And oftentimes, what we need to do is figure out what control do we have? What steps can we take? Even if it's a little bit, even if we can't change the outer world, how do we rethink things to not be a victim in our own inner world? Because our inner world is really the world that we inhabit day by day.
You know, this idea of victim mentality is something I see all the time when students are saying this is out of my control. A lot of different narratives people have based on the frustration of this process that they're going through. And I love that you bring this to a point of, hey, own your life, respond in a different way. So you get feedback. And instead of going to your reflexive, I can't believe this is happening again, maybe asking, what does this feedback have for me in terms of improving my paper or growing the way that I think? And even doing something that maybe you hadn't done, reaching out to your chair and saying, hey, in the past, feedback has come and this has been how I react to it. Can you help me understand how to take in this feedback a different way? Reach out. It's not that you have to do this by yourself. You're in a program with people there to support you. So coming up with maybe some creative and new ways of thinking about these things that are causing you pain could be maybe a portal out of this.
You know, this is not something people have to deal with alone, because sometimes, especially highly intelligent people that are thinking all the time, it's hard for the mind to be constantly spinning when something comes into your life that actually you feel as though it's trying to take you down, or you feel it's incredibly challenging. So get that external perspective and the reality check and get the help that you need with that.
And I listened to you on another podcast where you talked about this inner world, and really everyone's experiencing reality in a different way. That is what this all comes down to me is, how do we experience our reality in a more fulfilled way?
Absolutely. That's 100%, Heather, what it comes down to. And I could tell you a number of practices.
Tapping into this audience, which ones are coming up that my listeners need to hear?
I feel like probably your listeners are a lot of individuals just like me who are very, very studious and work very hard and have trouble turning off the thoughts. And so what do you do with the thoughts? How do you take your energy and enable your mind to relax so that you're not constantly spinning? For me, one of the most powerful exercises is actually a simple breathing technique. And that is you breathe in for 2, hold for 4, and out for 8. And first, I'll tell you a little bit about the philosophy of this technique, and then we can practice it together. The philosophy is that you're breathing in really quickly, so you're flooding your brain with oxygen. Then you're holding on to it, and you're releasing it very slowly. That creates a net positive oxygen saturation in your brain, which signals to your brain that there's nothing to worry about. It's okay. You can be calm. And this is in contrast to if you're hyperventilating, running away from a tiger, or super stressed, you're like, you're breathing all the oxygen out, having much more carbon dioxide in your body, in your brain. And that actually tells your body, this is a very stressful situation. Rev up your sympathetic nervous system, calm down your parasympathetic or the rest and digest system, tune that down. And we don't want to be doing that. Why am I sharing this exercise in particular? Because if the issue is too many thoughts, it's hard to chase thoughts with more thoughts, even if they're positive thoughts, constructive thoughts, etc. But I will give you things like that as well. But oftentimes, the best way to deal with difficult thoughts is to get out of your thoughts, get out of your mind and into your body, to focus on your breath, to be mindful. So let's first try this practice together, and then I'll give you a few more. So in for 2, hold for 4, and out for 8. We'll do 3 breaths like this. So in for 2, hold for 4, out for 8. In for 2, hold for 4, out for 8. In for 2, hold for 4, and out for 8. The best thing about this practice is you can do it anywhere. No one knows you're doing it. You can do it if you're stressed out, if you're having anxiety, if you're having a panic attack, if you're meeting with your advisor and suddenly feel overwhelmed. I want to give you 2 more techniques to deal with difficult, pressing thoughts that seem to, go nowhere and that get us in trouble. Whenever your thoughts start spinning, you label whatever emotion you are feeling. I am feeling scared, angry, anxious, overwhelmed, exhausted, enraged, whatever it is. You label it. I'm feeling this. And then you take your attention away from that thought and bring it onto your body and onto your senses in particular. And you ask the question and start to feel, what does it smell like in the room right now? What does it taste like in my mouth? What does it feel like on the seat that I am sitting on? What do I hear right now? What do I see? And then you go through all your senses and engage your senses in your experience. So you're acknowledging the thought. You're saying, okay, I'm feeling this. And then you're making the conscious shift to your body and to your senses. So this is a way also to work with difficult thoughts. And then the final way, this is a powerful meditation to see what thoughts come up, label the thought. I'm having a thought about having lunch with this person who I find very stressful. Then you imagine actually taking this thought, putting it on a cloud that's floating in front of you and watching it float away. And then you create a vacuum in your mind. And of course, within seconds, a new thought will enter. And then whatever thought that is, I'm having thoughts about my mom coming up for a Thanksgiving. Take that thought, put it on a cloud, watch it float away. And then a new thought will enter. And you can sit in this meditation, maybe starting with 5 minutes, but eventually to work up to 20 minutes. And what it does, why it's so powerful, is that this meditation helps you change your relationship with your thoughts. Usually, our thoughts are such that they come into our mind and they stick around until they are ready to leave. But this shifts the balance and the thoughts come in, you acknowledge them, you're not pushing hard against them. We don't want to push too hard because what we resist persists. So we want to acknowledge and then let it flow through you. And then next. So those are 3 exercises to work with a lot of the challenges that I know I had when I was a medical student and still sometimes have today.
And these are very simple. They're free. You taught them to us in just a matter of minutes. And how amazing would it be if you walked into a graduate seminar and it started with, all right, everyone, let's take a breath, 2 seconds in, hold it, 8 seconds out. How much more cognitively present would you be in the room? Or if you were able to have conversations with your chair, your committee, and say, I'm feeling very overwhelmed. And then your chair said, okay, let's label that feeling. What do you hear? What do you taste? What you bring up is something that an interview I did with David G a couple weeks ago. All of these fit into what he called a pattern interrupt. So it's this idea that these analytical overthinkers, often type A, very compulsive people drawn to terminal degrees, sometimes just need to interrupt the patterns that they've been running.
That's exactly right. The people listening to this are in graduate school. To do that, you needed to do well first in elementary school and then high school and then college. And then these are people who have been running so many of these patterns since they were little. So to change an inborn, essentially, or an in-taught pattern of so many years, it's incredibly difficult unless you're very, very aware. And I just think back, how long I had those patterns. I went to a residential high school even. I went to the Illinois Math and Science Academy in Aurora, Illinois. Had anyone back then told me that self-care was crucial? Achievement was crucial. Getting A's was crucial. We were immigrants, this whole self-care thing. This is a very Western notion. It's like, you do well in school, of course, take care of yourself, but yeah, do well in school. That's how you accomplish anything. And so I love the pattern interrupt concept. And I think that that's right on.
And I think what happened, at least I see it happening for a lot of doctoral students, and I know it happened for me, that go, 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 overachiever at all costs gets you where you want it to be. And so you're rewarded for it. Well, I worked really hard, and therefore it got me into this undergraduate program. It got me into this master's program. It got my thesis accepted. So I'm going to keep doing that. I will keep having this type of focus on achieving. And something changes when you're working on your doctorate where you realize that's not working anymore.
Absolutely. It reminds me of a book by a friend and colleague, Marshall Goldsmith, and the book is What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And it's 100% exactly what you're saying, because working so hard, using your mind to its fullest capacity, amazing. You're able to achieve so much, and it's your gift. If you were given that kind of mind, it is your gift. But every gift comes with a price. And sometimes the price of the gift could be a relentless mind that's difficult to quiet, or a whole bunch of other things that also are just a byproduct of that gift.
So this idea of self-care being non-negotiable, I would just like to encourage the listeners to consider this. You're in this program 9 times out of 10 because you want to have a positive impact in the world. You want to change other people's lives. You want to be the leaders in your fields, but you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you're struggling with feeling like this process is painful, I encourage you to adopt these techniques that Anna shared with us today and really explore this idea of what might your doctoral program be teaching you on a soul level, and really feeling empowered to have the tools to integrate these lessons into your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just think back to when I was in high school, this notion of self-care, was that ever brought up? I don't know, because I think I probably slept like 4 hours a night for a few years, I think it probably stunted my growth for all I know. I probably should be 6 feet tall and I'm 5'6". So, but it's like things like that, we get through it. But nevertheless, if I had to do things differently, I definitely would have taken much better care of myself and prioritized self-care, and still probably gotten to the same places in many ways, maybe even more, maybe even like further along, because I was taking better care of myself.
Which is hard to imagine given all your accomplishments to date. But I want to just say, if there's any educators listening to this call, people in administration and higher ed, think about adding some things to the curriculum that could actually influence not just your students' lives, but degree completion rates, time to completion. All those types of things will be positively impacted. It's really a win-win when we start looking at things like, how does spirituality come into graduate programs?
It's the old, motto, just like you're saying, everybody is seeking to do better, to complete their own work, but ultimately to make a contribution to the world. And we can't make a contribution or take care of others if we don't fill up our own cup first. Oftentimes, especially if people are going into healing professions, you have people who are so good at giving of themselves in every way. They're not so good at taking care of themselves, at giving themselves what they need. So it's recognizing that actually that is a necessary prerequisite for being the best giver that you can be.
Yeah, I have even gone so far as to say, if you don't practice self-care, you don't exist. By that, I mean, your shell of a body might be here, but the you that came here to express itself and to live its life purpose isn't showing up. On that note, you have a mini course called Spirituality and Mental Health. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. This is something that came out of a study that I did in my private practice in psychiatry in New York City. And it was looking at a meditation technology, basically these binaural beats, which are a way of meditating on steroids. You get the effects of meditation much faster by listening to binaural beats, which is a beat that's a little bit different in the left and the right ear. Somehow that difference enables your brain to absorb the effects of meditation much more. There's a lot of science and data on it. And in my practice, I showed that it really helps with anxiety, and that meditation alone will help with these binaural beats. Therapy alone will help, but the two together have a synergistic effect, which is greater than the sum of its parts. So we put a course together with Karen Newell and Dr. Eben Alexander, who is the Harvard neurosurgeon and the #1 best-selling author of Proof of Heaven. And we're looking in this course at all the antecedents of spirituality and how they affect health and healing, and also more generally, how they affect our worldview. Dr. Alexander reviews all the different perceptions of reality that human beings have of how the world works, and also of the nature of the afterlife of, does the body end at death, or is there something more? And we look at different spiritual traditions and practices like meditation and how it affects mental health. So we hope that you will enjoy the free course. And if you like the free course, you can sign up for the greater course.
So I'll have that link below. And I just want to say the Sacred Acoustics, there's an app. I'll put that down below too, all the information for this. But I listened to that and it did absolutely up my meditation practice. And my daughter, who doesn't meditate but was having trouble sleeping, I said, hey, I want you to check out this app. And the next day she said, Mom, I fell asleep in the middle of that. And it usually takes me so long to fall asleep. So it's definitely doing something very, very special.
Absolutely. And it's powerful. And if you want to try the meditations themselves, you could try them for free on the site as well.
So I will have all those links, as well as links to Dr. Yusim's book and how to connect with her. Before we end today, Anna, do you have any final words of wisdom or a quote you'd like to share?
Quote. Well, I really like the quote by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, which basically says that we're not necessarily just human beings who occasionally have these spiritual experiences. Perhaps there's another way of looking at it. Perhaps we're actually spiritual beings that are having this temporary physical experience. It's a little bit of a paradigm shift, this idea, but I really like that quote because it helps us to see the world anew.
It does. So again, Anna, thank you so much for all the valuable information you shared with us today. It was such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you so much, Heather, for having me.
Thanks for listening, and I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. The Happy Doc Student Podcast is brought to you by expandyourhappy.com, and you can learn more there. Oh, and hey, if you want to make my day, would you rate, review, and subscribe to this show? Before I sign off, I do need to remind you, the information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk.